The advent and growth of the Internet and information technology was accompanied by efforts to exploit information and computer networks. These efforts were often state-sponsored in the beginning and conducted by intelligence or military entities. They also were given some very interesting names, from Byzantine Hades to Buckshot Yankee. In 1999, one of those first codenamed cyber attacks was Moonlight Maze. See, I told you the names were interesting, almost poetic. Moonlight Maze was a cyber attack that went after U.S. Department of Defense computers, highlighting their vulnerability. U.S. officials blamed the attack on Russia, but the evidence for definitive attribution was inconclusive. By 2002, we started to see the first round of attacks targeting the Internet itself, specifically by using distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS. Such attacks shut down parts of the Internet or specific websites by flooding the target with superfluous requests to try to overload the system and shut it down. These DDoS attacks were used by a number of different attackers, from state actors to non-state actors, including hacktivist groups like Anonymous. Efforts to flood the target can originate from multiple sites, even hijack servers. Think of it this way. If a crowd or mob of people obstructed the entry to a store, and legitimate shoppers had great difficulty getting through the door, that's what a DDoS attack is like. Byzantine Hades was a code name given to persistent intrusions around 2009 and onwards into the U.S. government, military, and private sector systems carried out by another cyber adversary, China. These intrusions were designed to steal information, including intellectual property and sensitive proprietary information. Like the other codename operations, Byzantine Hades was a wake-up call for the U.S. government, but the reality was that there was an unending number of these alarms, which led to limited success in deterring state adversaries like China. Buckshot Yankee was a different flavor of intrusion for which key details still aren't public. This 2008 malicious cyber attack was most likely conducted by Russia against U.S. military networks and specifically targeted the U.S. Central Command, which was fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The malicious code, also known as a worm, was planted by USB flash drive, those plugins to your laptop frequently used to store and share information. It's believed that this plugin, referred to as Patient Zero, originated somewhere at a Department of Defense facility in the Middle East. From there, it spread to other computers and DoD networks, including classified networks. I think it's easy to see why this caused so much concern. But Buckshot Yankee also clearly demonstrated the lack of cyber preparedness within the Department of Defense and the U.S. military. It led to the decision to finally create a dedicated U.S. military cyber unit, now called the U.S. Cyber Command, which we will discuss in a few minutes. In this case, the response to a serious incident finally resulted in significant policy and strategic changes in the cyber landscape. The Russian targeting of Estonia in 2007 represented a milestone in cyber operations, with Estonian state institutions weathering a sustained attack by a skilled cyber adversary. This incident had everything: political motivation, non-state hacktivists as surrogates of the Russian state, a shocked NATO unable to figure out a response, and a somewhat happy ending: the rise of the small nation of Estonia as a cyber defense and resilience champion. It all started with the Estonian decision to move a Soviet-era World War II memorial from a main square in its capital of Tallinn, something that deeply offended the Russians, but that also represented 5 painful decades of Soviet rule to the Estonians. The 3-week-long cyber campaign consisted of the DDoS attacks mentioned earlier. The attacks targeted and disrupted Estonian government websites, its political parties, its two largest banks, and three of Estonia's major media organizations. These attacks were perpetrated by participants recruited from online Russian nationalist forums and other patriotic Russian volunteers. Although Estonia's infrastructure was targeted, neither the campaign nor the disruptions it caused resulted in loss of life or destruction, leaving NATO, of which Estonia was a member, to scratch its head over how it should respond to cyber attacks against its members. The Russian government denied responsibility, but of course one must wonder how these patriotic volunteers were so empowered and operated without interference, and were, in fact, cheered on in their efforts by Russia. The rest of the story is important. Having weathered the disruption of both its public and private sectors, the Estonian government developed and implemented a clear defensive cybersecurity strategy, reflecting an emphasis on public-private partnerships and a readiness to safeguard critical networks and data. Its capital, Tallinn, also became the host of NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. In the end, this small country was able to punch way above its weight in cybersecurity. Another huge event in cyber history is one you may have already read about, Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a malicious cyber worm identified in 2010 that was formulated to target and cause physical damage to industrial control systems. Stuxnet is generally considered to be the first weaponized cyber tool. It was allegedly built and deployed by the US and Israel, although neither government has confirmed its involvement. Stuxnet was designed to gradually attack and sabotage components of Iran's nuclear program and is believed to have been deployed in 15 Iranian nuclear facilities. It appears that the gradual nature of the attacks was designed to cause the Iranians to believe that the malfunctions were the results of human error rather than a cyber attack. Stuxnet was configured to cause Iran's nuclear centrifuges to spin out of control while producing readings that operations were normal. The worm was eventually revealed by investigations of several cybersecurity companies, but not before it caused significant problems and delays for Iran's nuclear program. There are several key points here. First, this was a cyber tool that targeted operational technology. Stuxnet was extremely complex and took years to develop as it had very specific and incisive targets. It's not an off-the-shelf item, to put it mildly, but quite candidly, the technology and creativity behind it is somewhat amazing. It is also clear that utilizing a cyber tool this complex and complicated would be limited to the most important targets, like national security priorities, and of course, opens the door to further development and ultimate escalation among key cyber powers. So, while Stuxnet was an incisive cyber tool in terms of destruction, others might not be so limited. Thus began the debate of a potential cyber Pearl Harbor, a catastrophic attack on critical infrastructure like power grids that would cause physical damage and injuries or death to civilians. Have we had one? In my opinion, absolutely not. Is it theoretically possible? Yes, unfortunately, but this debate is also a red herring. It sets the threshold for damage from a cyber attack that is quite high, forgetting that lower-level attacks can cause significant problems in everyday life, as well as to our national and economic security, a kind of death by 1,000 cuts. And just a cursory look at recent hacks of private sector companies should remind us that smaller scale intrusions can be disruptive and dangerous even without catastrophic outcomes. Recall the recent hack of Colonial Pipeline that resulted in a shutdown of gasoline supplies along the east coast of the United States. Next up, we'll examine the challenge of attribution, the act of figuring out the origins of a cyber attack. We'll look at why attribution is so hard and also so important.